is Joshua Rodriguez. I'm one of our product marketers at Persona, and I'll be today's moderator. A few housekeeping things. We do use Zoom as our platform of choice to host our webinars. What that means is that there is a Q&A button at the bottom. So as you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A button. We do have a section at the end to answer your questions. We are also recording this webinar, so shortly after you should be receiving a copy of this webinar, or at least a link to the where it's hosted. In terms of today's agenda, again, 4 different parts. We'll start at the macro. What are we seeing at the candidate hiring landscape in 2026? What are we seeing and hearing from the voices of the talent front line? And then we'll do a demo of our candidate verification solution along with the Q&A. But with all of that, I will pass it over to Natalie to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, my name is Natalie and I'm an early employee at Persona. I'm currently the head of talent and we use the Persona product to help deter fraud, and I'm excited to be able to share my perspective on it today. And I'll hand it over to Jenna next.
Awesome. Well, it's great to meet everyone. My name is Jenna Kim, and I'm a product manager here at Persona for our integrations marketplace. And I've been leading our candidate verification initiatives, helping scope out what integrations we want to build with ATSs and HRIS platforms, as well as understanding how to implement end-to-end flows to meet all of our customers' needs. So that's me, and I'll pass it off to Justin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Marciano, and I am a product architect on our workforce team. Previously, I was building a company in the candidate verification space where I studied and helped build tooling to help identify deepfakes and other virtual avenues of attack via organizations' hiring and/or recruiting processes. Really saw the problem coming from my experience in crypto with the North Korean IT worker issue, which is where contractors pose as U.S. citizens or elsewhere, when in reality they're North Korean government employees looking to extract salary and/or data. I recently joined Persona to help lead this effort alongside my colleagues here in tackling this new and scary security vulnerability that's becoming more and more of a problem. So to open things up, I wanted to walk the group through the new landscape that we live in today when it comes to candidate fraud. So by 2028, 1 in 4 candidate profiles globally will be fake, excuse me. This is a claim by Gartner, but before I elaborate on this, I do want to quickly poll the room. Do you guys think this is accurate? Do you think this is higher or lower? Even estimate, throw a percentage in the chat, whether you think it's higher than 25%, but very curious what the overall group is seeing in their day-to-day lives. Too high. And already higher. Accurate. Awesome. Okay. Well, it seems like Gartner typically knows what they're doing there. Though, Gartner says 1 in 4, anecdotally, what we're actually hearing is around 50 to 60% of applicants being fake. And that's due to the fact that some of these roles are, higher turnover and frankly, tech forward companies that rely on a lot of remote work. So we do think this is actually going to grow, and it's unfortunate, but it's just the fact of the matter is that AI is evolving, fraudsters are evolving, and fraudsters always move first. So there's typically that leading effect by fraudsters, which is why we're actually seeing these issues happen. So we wanted to jump into what is driving candidate fraud. And the first is the rise of remote work. So COVID, as we all know, really kickstarted this in the early 2020s. Remote roles have really expanded the talent pool, but unfortunately, they've also expanded the attack surface here. Fraudsters can now apply from anywhere, often never needing to show up in person, which really enables a new level of anonymity when applying for jobs and widening the gap for individuals who are actually evaluating these candidates. Like I had just mentioned before, we were starting to see certain roles, especially targeted, like software engineering, data science, and IT roles. That's typically because they're fast hiring cycles, high compensation, and then do have access to sensitive internal systems, as we've seen with some recent breaches. The second major driver here is generative AI. It's significantly lowered the barrier to committing fraud during hiring. And I think we've all experienced this at this point, even if we're iterating on our own resumes. At the application stage, we're seeing things like impersonation, synthetic identities, and location spoofing. We see resumes that are perfectly curated to the application. And, sometimes it feels like there's a damned if you do, damned if you don't moment where this application is fantastic, but you're also worried that this is a fraudster. During assessments, candidates can use proxies, as in other individuals, or AI-generated responses to help pass technical screens. That's using tools like Cluely or even ChatGPT, held up against your phone right on the screen. And then in interviews, we're also seeing deep fakes with real-time assistance tools that are making it really hard to verify who you're actually speaking with. And after this offer or after an offer is extended, these risks don't really go away. A lot of the conversations we've been having is, what happens after someone gets hired, the 6 week, the 8 week, the 12 week, the year later, things like overemployment, fake references, or those bait and switch identity switching techniques can definitely still happen. So as you can see here, we have a plethora of deep fakes, and AI is just clearly making it easier to fake identities during the hiring process. And we see this across Persona as an organization, not just with candidates. So this example here is a recruiter who had captured multiple deep fakes in action. And though they're pretty identifiable, just somewhat simply how they use it, even though there is not really the best quality, the issue becomes that your brain doesn't work the way that these fraudsters operate. Psychologically, it's really difficult to have to question the legitimacy of someone on the other end of a screen, on the other end of a phone, the videos you're watching. You're not really trained to question realness of another human being in general. It's really a new paradigm, and that's why we're tackling this problem alongside all of you today. So some common types of candidate fraud here. The most common one that we're seeing that's not really AI related, but is slipping through the cracks is, like I mentioned, bait and switch, where a candidate will go through the full loop. Let's say Jenna takes an interview for me end to end, obviously crushes it, and she gets the job. So she passes the technical assessments, did really well in the live interviews, and seemed like a really strong hire. But after the start, I jump in. I'm not as technical as Jenna. Something clearly is going to feel off to the actual individuals on the call or on calls in the work environment, and therefore the overall performance drops. And this is a really significant issue that's happening to a lot of companies. So somebody's really clearly taking them through the process instead of actually doing it themselves, and therefore you have this impersonation issue. Excuse me, bait and switch issue. The other example is impersonation. So this is when the candidate isn't just exaggerating their experience, they're really presenting a completely false identity, whether that's using stolen credentials or using deep fakes. Basically, they are misrepresenting who they are. And we've really started to see these issues come up with, like I mentioned in the very beginning, there have been cases of North Korean IT workers working at Western companies where they move through the process utilizing these techniques. Others on this page are relatively standard, like location fraud, which is spoofing your location, credentials fraud, which is faking work experience or education, and then synthetic fraud, which likely uses a bit of all these together. But this does bring us to today's question, which is how do you verify that a candidate you're hiring is real and is who they say they are? And to help us answer that, I'll pass it to Natalie, our head of talent, who actually uses the Persona candidate verification product every single day.
Great. Thanks, Justin. Hey, everyone. For those of you who joined a little bit after we started, my name is Natalie Disraeli, and I lead the talent function at Persona. I helped hire most of the early teammates. I've been here about 6 years, and now I lead a team of recruiters responsible for all the hiring efforts here. I joined Persona in the middle of COVID, so I've seen lots of different hiring environments, including when we were hiring mostly remotely, right, before we were back in an office again. And working at a company like Persona has been a privilege. I've learned so much, but one of the things I've learned is just many, many stories of how creative fraudsters are, and especially in today's day and age. And it's really made me want to help however I can just to make sure that fraud doesn't enter our workforce, making sure that we're doing everything possible throughout our process. So I want to talk a little bit about, okay, what is actually at stake here? The first thing, which is really the biggest impact, would be time wasted by recruiters, by hiring managers, and by interviewers as well. It can be really frustrating if you find a candidate that you like, you bring them through the entire process, only to find at the very end that they turn down your offer due to, let's say, compensation expectation misalignment. If it's something you could have talked about with a candidate really early in the process and you didn't, it's very frustrating. But discovering a fraudulent candidate after going through the entire hiring process all that time is all the more frustrating because it would feel very personal, right? And so you want to put yourself in a position where you're avoiding that as much as possible. But beyond that, for me, something that I've learned just through working here, especially, is the security risks too. Fraudsters are getting really creative. And if a fraudster does enter your organization and gets hired and gets access to company systems and steals sensitive data or takes dangerous actions in company code, that would put your company in a very vulnerable position, right? So you don't want to put yourself in that situation. And unfortunately, that is a newer added layer of responsibility that talent teams didn't really have before. And I don't know, maybe we shouldn't as teams. So if I were to say, gosh, one takeaway from this whole thing, if anything, would be please like have a conversation with your CISO, have a conversation with whoever leads security at your company and figure out a plan to partner together and figure out, okay, what is going to be your plan to help prevent candidate fraud from entering your workforce, regardless of whether or not that involves persona. That would be my one piece of advice. I also want to talk about how traditional methods are no longer sufficient anymore, especially today with the rise of AI, which Justin was talking about. I would have thought the left column would be enough. Things like background checks are actually meant to verify a piece of paper and not the actual person starting your first day. Work authorization similarly verifies work authorization, but not the actual individual joining day one. Video interviews are good. There is a person on the other side, so you could do those, but who even is that person? Among many things, Justin talked about bait and switch, right, which is very common for companies. And in-person interviews, those are great. But as a sole strategy, it can be tough if you're hiring a mostly remote workforce, if that individual will be remote, and it could just be really costly, time consuming, and also later in the process too, to feel really confident to be able to recommend. And so what companies are doing is they're trying to apply newer strategies and just continue to layer on top of it. And newer strategies just are not foolproof, especially anymore. And they're very time consuming. So things like really scrutinizing resumes are not scalable realistically. Your ATS can capture some passive signals, but there's companies like Tofu that are doing this, but they're really limited to top of funnel. So you could have strong candidates kind of slip through the cracks. Asking location specific questions, AI can help polish those talk tracks now. And you can ask someone to kind of show their ID on Zoom, but it's not robust enough. It's not trustworthy enough. And that experience could also be a little bit awkward. And so that leads you to think, okay, what is possible here without compromising candidate experience? And what we do at Persona is we use our product to stop fraud completely. But it also keeps the candidate experience really smooth, and it saves us a lot of time and honestly stress thinking about those left columns from those last two slides, knowing that we're able to completely stop fraud in its tracks. We can operate with more confidence. For me, when I work with vendors, I'm very picky. I'm very selective with vendors I actually am happy with and get excited about. And my favorite vendors are ones who kind of operate behind the scenes where I don't know they're there. I'm not having to go into a separate website ever or a separate product, and they're actually kind of embedded into our day-to-day workflow, and they kind of operate behind the scenes. I'm not working with them on bugs or errors or understanding UX questions, asking a lot of customer support questions. They just kind of operate. And I'm very proud to say that that is Persona. We use it too for candidate verification, and it's very, very seamless. And it just kind of operates behind the scenes, and you largely don't even know it's there. So I'm very happy to answer more questions in the Q&A section, but for now, I will pass it over to Jenna, and she is going to show you how it works.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the background, Natalie. And yeah, as a reminder, I'm Jenna and I'm a product manager here. I've spent many, many hours learning from our customers and our prospects about candidate fraud, what they're seeing, and ultimately how Persona can help them combat it. And as such, have led our integration builds for Greenhouse, Workday Ashby, and more, which we'll cover in a bit. So let's get right into it. So the main goal with candidate verification is ultimately to know that the candidate is who they say they are. And this manifests in three questions. First of all, is this candidate a real legitimate person? Second of all, is this the same person that I am seeing throughout the hiring process? And third, am I even allowed to hire this person? So the way that we combat this is with what we call a government ID and selfie verification. You can think of this as a two-step check where a candidate will show their government-issued ID and take a photo of it, and then take a selfie. And so if we circle back to those three questions from the previous slide, there are a few ways that GovID and selfie can answer these. So first, is this candidate a real legitimate person? The government ID is checked for authenticity, things like security features, formatting, whether it's even a known valid document, and also can confirm that the person is backed by a real government-issued identity. For that second question, is this the same person? Well, the selfie can be compared against the ID photo that we capture using facial matching technology, and can also ensure that the person who completed the verification is the same one who is showing up at interviews and signing offer letters, especially if you trigger GovID and selfie at multiple points in the hiring funnel. And lastly, am I even allowed to hire this person? Government ID can help just confirm that the candidate meets eligibility requirements before you invest further in the hiring process by providing geographic and document risk signals. But bottom line here is that the government ID and selfie check is like a digital front door handshake. It's fast for the candidate, but it also gives your team confidence that they are hiring a real verified person. So in terms of how we recommend integrating this into your hiring process, we recommend introducing IDV in the mid to late stages of the candidate journey. And there are a few critical checkpoints that we recommended our default solution. So the first time you might introduce it is kind of at that mid-funnel stage. Think the hiring manager screen or something equivalent to that where you would do the full GovID and selfie flow. From there, you can optionally trigger a quick selfie-only re-verification at either the panel or on-site interview and or the offer extension round. And again, this is to help combat the bait and switch fraud that Justin was alluding to earlier. And then lastly, at onboarding, this is kind of when a candidate is at the precipice of becoming an employee and when you're about to grant access to internal systems and issue equipment. And at this point, this is when you would do a full re-verification GovID and selfie. You can think of this as the final checkpoint before real access is given. So what is different about this approach is that we can fit into your hiring funnel, especially in those mid to late stages. Other tools focus on top of funnel signals, which are definitely helpful, but it's not holistically sufficient. Persona can provide coverage for those mid to late stages where hiring decisions are crucial and frankly, resource intensive. And so we're designed to be flexible and configurable so that you can build a continuous layer of trust throughout the entire hiring process. What I will also call out on the next slide is that we plug into the tools that you're already using today. Whether your ATS is Ashby, Greenhouse, or Workday, we integrate into all of those workflows and more ATS integrations on the way so that your team is not jumping between systems. And we can connect into tools like Zoom as well so that you can verify a candidate right before they join an interview or video conferencing call. And The goal here is to make this feel seamless and fit into your existing processes and meet your talent teams right where they're at. So at this point in time, I am actually going to take over the screen share and show y'all a demo of how this works. So today, I'm going to show y'all how talent teams can use Persona's integrations with Greenhouse and Zoom to trigger identity verification for candidates before they enter a Zoom interview. And just to reiterate, this is an example flow with Greenhouse, but we support other ATS integrations as well. So let's get started here from a recruiter's perspective in Greenhouse. And so the idea here is simple. When a recruiter moves a candidate to a specific stage, let's say the face-to-face interview, Persona automatically kicks off a request to verify their identity. So here I have a candidate who's ready to move forward. I'm going to simply click that next stage in Greenhouse. And that is all that the recruiter has to do on their end. In the background, Persona has sent the candidate an email to verify their identity. So that is all that the recruiter has to do from their end, and let's take a look at what the candidates received in their inbox. So they've just received this email, and for the purposes of the demo, the email is pretty boilerplate, but it can be fully branded to your company, your logo, colors, domain, etc. So it feels like an integrated part of your hiring process. And so the candidate can start by clicking that Verify Identity button, and they will be redirected to view a QR code, which they will need to scan with their phone. We'll give that a second to load. But the reason that we do this is because by guiding the candidate to use their phone and complete the verification on their mobile device, this will provide not only the best-in-class capture experience for the candidate, but also provide enhanced fraud security and device intelligence for you. So candidate will be shown our consent screen. They'll just click that Begin Verifying button. And then they'll be prompted to input some information about their government-issued ID, country it's from, the type of ID it is, and then they will be prompted to capture some photos. So here the candidate is required to take photos of both the front and back of the ID, and we use auto capture technology, so we take photos of these images automatically. And after the ID check, the candidate will be prompted to take a quick selfie. This is a multi-pose check where they're centering themselves and then looking left and looking right. And this is where Persona can compare the selfie to the portrait on the ID image and check if the person in front of the camera is real and not a deepfake. And then throughout this process, in the background, Persona is collecting device, network, and behavioral signals to build a more complete picture of the verification. And it's as simple as that. This whole flow took under 20 seconds for the candidate, and Persona processes everything in real time. So now, back on their laptop, they're going to see this completion screen. And when they hit done, they will be prompted actually to join the Zoom meeting automatically, where they can have their interview with their hiring manager. So it is a very seamless handoff, and the candidates don't have to go hunting for their calendar invite or anything like that. So to close the loop, back in Greenhouse from the recruiter's perspective, the candidate's profile has been automatically updated with the success verification status, which indicates that they have passed Persona's checks. There's no need for the recruiter to log into a separate system. We can write this result directly back to the candidate record, so Greenhouse can remain your source of truth. So now that we have gone through this full flow, there are a few takeaways I want you all to have. First of all, the candidate experience is fast and intuitive. This demo video is 2 minutes to voice over, but in reality, it can take seconds. And second, your recruiting team does not have to change the way that they work. Persona identity verification can fit directly into your existing hiring flows. And lastly, you are getting strong, reliable signals on identity. Our teams here at Persona are constantly improving our GovID and selfie technology so you can gain higher assurance that a candidate is who they say that they are. So thank you all so much for listening, and I'm going to pass it back to Josh, but happy to answer any more questions during the Q&A.
If you do have any lingering questions, our team would be more than happy to set up a time to do quick consultation and a demo with you all. So thank you so much for joining today.